Listen carefully to what I am about to say, and hear me out. Resist the urge to turn off this video and ignore what I am about to say. For most of you, this video will go directly against what you have been led to believe your entire life. Do not let cognitive dissonance keep you from discovering the truth. Folks, the greatest lie ever told to all of us is that evolution is scientific fact. It is not. It is a belief. It is a fundamental religious belief. And in this video, I am going to prove that to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, it is important to realize that the main opposition against evolution comes from people of faith, typically people who interpret the Bible literally. The problem with this is that our society has conditioned us to believe that anyone who literally interprets the Bible is a nut and is not to be taken seriously. Ultimately, this results in an added, additional mental roadblock for one to get past in order to even hear the opposing arguments. So let's break evolution down so that we can understand why it is in fact a religious belief and not scientific fact. The simplest way to explain this is by defining our terms. Let's look at the word religion. The first definition of religion that you will find states that it is a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. The second definition is a specific fundamental set of beliefs and practices generally agreed upon by a number of persons. The third definition is the body of persons adhering to a particular set of beliefs and practices. And the last definition I'll give you is probably the most important. Something one believes in and follows devotedly. A point or matter of ethics or consciousness. So basically, all a religion is a particular worldview that people subscribe to, which helps to explain the origin of the universe and is followed devotedly. So now let's look at the definition of science. The definition of the word science clearly states that it is a systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. That is crucial to understanding why evolution at its core is a belief and not a science. Because in order to qualify as science, it has to be knowledge that is gained through observation and experimentation. The funny thing about evolution is that even if a scientific experimentation and observation was performed, which proved its possibility, still would not be proof of it having occurred, but only that it theoretically could have occurred. And there's a big distinction between the two. See, in order for evolution on a larger scale to be able to explain the origin of life as it claims to do, it would have had to have been observed. Now, if we look at the definition of evolution, we can see that evolution is clearly defined as the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form. Folks, in order for something to become more complex, you need to introduce new information. Now, for the sake of simplicity, just realize that in order for evolution to even be possible, evolutionists claim that this new information is introduced through mutations. Now, common sense suggests that mutations are usually negative things, but evolutionists are optimistic and are counting on that rare case where damage will cause information to materialize out of nowhere, just by getting extremely lucky during scrambling of the genetic code. Evolutionists acknowledge that each tiny bit of new information is extraordinarily rare. Therefore, they say that's why it takes millions and millions and even billions of years to happen on a noticeable scale. Evolutionists depend on mutations to generate new information in their model. that part of the model is a huge problem. The stubborn fact is that no instance of mutation making information has ever been confirmed, not even in the tiniest increment. Never, not once. There is not a single field observation or lab finding. The only thing that they've been able to find is a mutation which recombines existing information, or a mutation that results in the loss of information. But they have never found a mutation that resulted in new information being created. Never, ever, not once, not one time has that ever been proven to even be possible. Folks, adding brand new information to the genome essentially is evolution. So if there is no evidence that it has ever happened, there is no evidence for evolution at all. Furthermore, if there is no evidence at all that it is even possible, and no one has ever observed it happening, there is no way to calculate an average time frame for it to occur. You can't develop a mathematical equation to express the time needed for this beneficial mutation that would result in the creation of new information to occur. Meaning, there's no way to know how long it would take, even if it was theoretically possible. So this whole idea of it taking millions or billions of years is literally pulled out of thin air. Now at this point, many of you are probably asking yourselves, what about the fossil record? To you I say, what fossil record? There is no such thing as a fossil record. All there is a bunch of bones and fossils in the dirt. In reality, all of these bones and fossils actually help to disprove evolution. And substantially, I might add. Darwin predicted the fossil record would present a smooth and gradual transition from one kind of organism to another, but instead we find sudden appearances of fully developed organisms. Not only are they not finding these quote-unquote missing links, they're actually finding new chains altogether. Even more damaging to the evolution theory than that, though, is a little thing called carbon-14. Now, radioactive carbon is like an hourglass that is inside all living things. But once an organism dies, the sand in the hourglass begins to run out. This is called radioactive decay. Nothing on Earth can stop it. And we know that carbon-14 has a short half-life. In layman's terms, we know that it is impossible for any trace of carbon-14 to last more than 100,000 years after something dies. So since evolutionists think fossils are millions of years old, they predicted that fossils cannot contain any trace of carbon-14. However, in recent years, the accelerator mass spectrometer has made it possible to measure trace amounts of carbon-14. Of course, many fossils are completely mineralized with no traces of the original carbon, let alone radioactive carbon. Nevertheless, there is a great deal of unmineralized fossil material being found, including such material as crude oil, coal, diamonds, and even dinosaur bone marrow. So what do we find when these things are tested? If you haven't already guessed, carbon-14 is present in all of these things, even diamonds. Folks, fossils are much younger than they've been telling us. And now, every AMS lab in the world has the proof. Testing labs all over the world are finding carbon-14 throughout the fossil record, from top to bottom, even after carefully filtering out potential contamination. This is conclusive proof that everything on Earth is less than 100,000 years old. So this brings us to our next topic. What about all the different dating methods that they have used to conclude that these fossils are millions of years old? Well, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is that these dating methods that they speak of, like carbon dating, potassium-argon dating, and so on and so forth, are not actually used to age fossils. The so-called geologic column is what is used to date fossils. The funny thing is, fossils are used to date the geological column. which is obviously circular reasoning and doesn't make any sense, but nonetheless, evolutionists do sometimes refer to these other dating methods, regardless of whether or not you're talking about carbon dating, uranium, thorium, lead dating, rubidium, strontium dating, potassium, argon dating. No matter which dating method you're talking about, they all make wild assumptions on the side of evolution. Let me give you a comparison. All of these dating methods are equivalent to this. Say I had a burning candle that was 8 inches tall and was burning at a rate of 1 inch per hour. If I were to then ask you, when was the candle lit, you would have to make some assumptions. That is essentially exactly how all of these different dating methods work. The scientists that use these dating methods make wild assumptions that cater to the evolution theory. This is important to realize because when they date a fossil using the numbers predicted using the evolution theory, if they were to calculate a number less than what they would expect to corroborate the widely accepted theory of evolution, they throw it out. Folks, the ultimate result in all of this is basically that all these different dating methods are completely and utterly useless. They are equivalent to making up a number off the top of your head. Now, you can research this topic more, and I encourage you to do so. And you will find people who have taken fossils in to be dated by experts, only to get back wildly different numbers. It is completely and utterly unreliable, and is quite frankly an absolute and utter joke. Now, while we're still on the topic of fossils, let's talk specifically about dinosaur bones. Now, evolutionists claim that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. Now, as I've already explained to you, this idea defies modern science. But nonetheless, they continue pushing this part of their theory. Now, imagine the surprise that the scientific community had when dinosaur bones began to surface which still had soft tissue present in them. Folks, there is no way that soft tissue could survive 65 million years. It is absolute and utter nonsense. Furthermore, they will try and tell you that dinosaurs went extinct long before man. Well, that concept in and of itself is completely flawed if you know anything about history. You can look up ancient cultures from all over the world that all depict and write about dinosaurs living side by side with man. These reports are everywhere. Most notably to some are the Inca stones. But let me take it one step further. There are still reports to this day of people seeing dinosaurs. I'm sure you have all heard of a little thing called the Loch Ness Monster. Now, folks, the Loch Ness Monster is not the only one. In fact, there are reports of similar creatures from thousands and thousands and thousands of different people witnessing these creatures in various different lakes all over the world. Now, it is believed by some that these creatures could be a plesiosaurus or something of the like, i.e., a dinosaur. And there are similar reports of people seeing different kinds of dinosaurs all over the world as well. There are even reports of pterodactyls supposedly digging up the graves of people in India from recent years. Now, it's important for me to note that I do not know if these reports are true or not. But when you get eyewitness accounts from thousands upon thousands of people, and you frame it in the light that dinosaurs have been around all along and have been going extinct gradually over the years, like many other animals have, it really makes you stop and scratch your head. Not only that, but it starts to make a whole lot more sense why scientists would be uncovering dinosaur bones that still have bone marrow in them. Now, the last thing that I want to bring up while we are still on the topic of fossils is that fossilization does not necessarily take millions of years, despite what you may have been told. In fact, in the laboratory, under perfect conditions, fossilization can occur in as little as a week. So no, it does not necessarily take millions of years for things to fossilize. So let's now move to the subtopic of human evolution. I'm sure that you have all heard at one point or another during your life that man evolved from ape. And I'm sure that you have been told about all of the different supposed transitional stages of human beings supposedly found linking Homo sapiens to apes or an ape-like creature. And all I have to say about this, folks, is that you really need to do your research. The vast majority of these are admitted and proven frauds, yet are still touted as being true. Let me give you just a few examples. Nebraska man was a name applied to Hesperopithecus Harold Cookie, a putative species of ape. Hesperopithecus meant ape of the Western world, and it was heralded as the first higher primate of North America. Now, folks, this discovery of Nebraska man was entirely based on a tooth, one single tooth. And from that tooth, they somehow magically constructed an entire species that conveniently for evolutionists served as one of many necessary missing links needed to serve as evidence for man evolving from ape. Another example is Piltdown man. Now, Piltdown man was originally classified as an Eoanthropus dawsoni. Now, the problem with this particular one is that it was discovered to be a forgery in 1953 and consisted of the lower jawbone of an orangutan deliberately combined with the cranium of a fully developed modern human. Folks, the thing you have to ask yourself is why are there so many frauds surrounding the evolution theory? Statistically speaking, these genetic mutations that result in the creation of new information are extraordinarily rare, meaning that in order for one species to transcend to the next level, as the theory of evolution dictates, they would have to cycle through hundreds, probably more like thousands upon thousands, of generations in order for this genetic fluke to occur. My point is this. Either these man-like apes should have been around for thousands and thousands of years, or at the given point in time when they did exist, there would have had to have been a huge population of them. In either case, the quote-unquote fossil record should be riddled with these bones. These archaeologists shouldn't be resorting to creating hoaxes in order to gain notoriety and fame for finding the missing link. They should literally be tripping over these things. Another one would be Lucy. Lucy was discovered by a man named Donald Johanson and was found in 1974 in the Awash Valley in Ethiopia. It was classified as an Australopithecus afarensis and only consisted of several hundred pieces of bone representing only about 40% of the skeleton of this supposed missing link. Now, what is highly suspect about this so-called discovery is that Donald Johanson went to Ethiopia with a grant to find the missing link. Now, just 2 weeks before his grant money expired and ran out, he discovered Lucy. Highly motivated, I suspect. Now, Lucy was 3 feet tall and was obviously a chimpanzee of some kind. Now, the skull was completely crushed, so they could not tell anything about the skull. But when they depict her in museums and in textbooks, they make her appear half human and half ape. The supposed knee joint of Lucy was found over 1.5 miles away and 200 feet deeper, and the hands and feet bones were missing, yet they somehow decide to put human feet on it whenever it's illustrated. Now, one that most of you have probably heard of is Neanderthal man. Neanderthals are generally classified by biologists as the species Homo neanderthalensis. The problem is it has been proven that the Neanderthal cannot possibly be a missing link between man and ape. I highly encourage you to do more research on the Neanderthal man. Unfortunately, there is far too much to get into in this video. But to give you a very short explanation, Neanderthals are actually thought to be superior humans with thicker bones and stronger muscles who actually lived to be very old. They also appear to have a 13% larger brain than modern man. Folks, any way you slice it, Neanderthals are not an intermediate step in the road to create modern man, but can actually be considered one step above modern man. They were smarter, stronger, faster, and bigger than we are today.
Now this brings me to a problem which should be obvious to anyone who supports the theory of evolution and who also considers themselves to be a scientist. And that is that evolution adamantly and vehemently defies entropy, or in other words, the second law of thermodynamics. This fundamental law clearly expresses that over time things degrade, things become more random, that things decline over time. A common sense way of looking at this, and something that should be obvious, is that we see species go extinct. They don't come into existence. We aren't seeing an increase, we're actually seeing a decrease. In fact, while we're at it, let me just quickly rattle off a few other fundamental scientific principles that evolution violates in one way or another. We've already talked about entropy, but it also violates biogenesis, Mendel's law of genetics, spontaneous generation, law of information systems, specified complexity, irreducible complexity, statistical mathematics, natural law, beneficial mutation, genetic complexity, and information theory. Now, folks, I must ask, how on earth can evolution be classified or considered a scientific fact when even at a fundamental level, even if proven possible, does not prove that it actually happened, has never actually even been proven possible scientifically, has been repeatedly discredited through fossil findings and recent research, hangs the majority of its most significant pieces of evidence on proven hoaxes, and defies numerous well-established scientific principles? Folks, at the end of the day, there is absolutely no way to quantify evolution as a fact or a certainty. It is a belief, and a religious one at that. People follow this theory devotedly and base their entire view of the universe and how it works on this theory. And in fact, the saddest and most apparent way that you can see for yourself how devoted the followers of the evolution theory are to this precious belief that they hold in their heart, if you go and look at any video on YouTube that even so much as questions the theory of evolution, and you will find in the comments section a plethora of people attacking the video and the video's creator in a slew of vulgar and grotesque ways, void of any logical basis, solely because their worldview is being crumbled and threatened. It is a belief, it is religious, and if we are not careful, it will be the foundation on which the one world religion is built. Folks, do not believe for 1 second that evolution is somehow fact, and that you must bend your personal religious beliefs around it. Evolution is far from fact, and is actually much closer to fiction. And it's important for me to note here that the pieces of evidence that they conclude are scientifically proven cannot possibly quantify as evolution. And calling them evolution or part of evolution is extremely misleading and deceitful. Adaptation is a much better word than microevolution to explain the subtle changes within a given species of the same kind. Obviously, animals change over time. That's how we're able to breed different types of dogs or faster racehorses for the Kentucky Derby. That's all done through selective breeding. That has nothing to do with evolution. Now, as we talked about in the beginning of this video, evolution implies the creation of new information. The problem is that every single one of these microevolution cases that they point to in an attempt to solidify their theory all are the result of recombining already existent information or losing information. In none of these is new information being created, which is what is essential for evolution to be true. To explain this on a graph, I've already explained that evolutionists believe that all forms of life evolve, meaning that they are adding complexity, they are adding information. This can be depicted by an upward graph. Now, this is all hypothetical. It has never once been proven in a laboratory setting or in the field.
What scientists do observe on a regular basis, however, is the recombining of already existent information, meaning no additional complexity being added, which can be represented by a horizontal line. In other words, variations within the same kind of animal, but all resulting from the same genetic information. Nothing added, nothing subtracted. They also occasionally witness mutations that result in the loss of genetic information. This can be represented by a downward slope, or the loss of complexity, the loss of information. Now, sometimes they try and confuse you, and they will point to something that they claim is a beneficial mutation that is actually the result of losing genetic information. But the way that that works is an organism losing a protein that a virus or bacteria attacks. Therefore, if the organism no longer produces and creates that protein, this virus that was attacking them is no longer able to. And they credit that as a beneficial mutation when in reality, it is the loss of genetic information and cannot possibly quantify as evolution. If anything, it's de-evolution. Now, when we look at these graphs, we know that the creation of new information has never once been observed, tested, or proven, even possible. The horizontal line accurately depicts no information being added or lost, while still creating variations within the same kind of animal. Now, the downward slope, as I described, explains the loss of genetic information. Now, the thing with this is, you can't continue losing genetic information and still see beneficial mutations. The vast majority of the time, when you lose genetic information, it's a negative thing. So yes, while scientists can occasionally point to the loss of genetic information being a benefit to a particular animal, not only is that extraordinarily rare, but it actually shows de-evolution. So when we look at this graph and we see what has been proven and what has never been proven, and we look back at these bones of Neanderthal man being uncovered, well, it begins to seem as though we're actually, in a sense, de-evolving. I mean, after all, that is what the science is indicating. Now, my point is that when somebody comes to you and claims that evolution is scientific fact, you can be rest assured that they clearly don't even understand evolution on an elementary level. Evolution has absolutely no proof to back it up, and the evidence that is used to support it is questionable at best.
How did the universe begin? What is its source? Few questions have generated as much controversy through the centuries or inspired as many impassioned opinions.
Ancient Greek materialism at the time of Plato and Aristotle up through 19th century idealism, the prevailing view was that the universe is eternal, that the universe never began to exist, that the universe as a whole is, as it were, a static, timeless entity.
This belief in an eternal, unchanging universe, for centuries a pillar of Western cosmology, was unexpectedly challenged in 1915 by Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. Einstein's equations implied a startling possibility. The cosmos was not static, but instead existed in a continual state of either contraction or expansion.
Einstein did not like the idea that the universe was dynamic at all. In fact, like almost all scientists at the time in the early 20th century, he assumed the universe was static and eternal. What's interesting and ironic is that he thought he had made some kind of mistake in his equations for the general theory of relativity. But a few years after he developed the theory, a Belgian astronomer named Lemaitre developed a model based upon his equations, which again predicted that the universe was in a continual state of expansion.
In 1929, theoretical predictions were confirmed with empirical data. At the Mount Wilson Observatory overlooking Los Angeles, astronomer Edwin Hubble studied light from distant galaxies. Hubble determined that galaxies beyond our Milky Way were moving away from us at a speed proportional to their distance from the Earth. The more distant the galaxy, the faster it is receding. Hubble's landmark discovery led most astronomers and physicists, including Albert Einstein, to a similar conclusion. If the universe is continually expanding, then at earlier points in its history, it must have been smaller and denser.
I think a good way to visualize this is to imagine that the history of the universe has somehow been photographed and made into a movie that we could play on a projector. As the projector runs forward, we watch the universe as it continually expands. But if the projector were to be stopped and were switched into reverse to make the movie run backward, then instead of watching the galaxies move farther and farther apart from each other, we'd see them draw closer and closer together.
As you trace this expansion back in time, the universe grows denser and denser and denser until finally the entire known universe is contracted down to a state of infinite density, which marked the beginning of the universe. At this point, which cosmologists call the singularity, all matter and energy, physical space and time themselves came into being. This literally represents the origin of the universe from nothing. So the startling implication of Hubble's discovery was the temporal finitude of the universe, that the universe had an absolute beginning at some point in the finite past.
During the second half of the 20th century, other discoveries also pointed to a universe with a beginning. These images of the cosmic microwave background radiation document what most scientists now believe is the remnant heat generated during the universe's early history. Background radiation is found throughout the cosmos and indicates its expansion from a sudden, perhaps violent moment in time. This evidence for a finite universe has reaffirmed the conclusion of an ancient philosophical deduction. It is called the Kalam cosmological argument.
The Kalam argument is deceptively simple in its formulation. It consists of basically 3 steps. Premise 1 is that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being uncaused out of absolutely nothing. Premise 2 is that the universe began to exist. And the remarkable development that has occurred is that for the first time, we now have solid scientific evidence for the truth of that second premise, that the universe began to exist. And from those 2 premises, it follows logically, therefore, the universe has a cause of its existence. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause of its existence. And that points to a reality beyond the universe, a transcendent reality beyond space and time, and therefore non-physical and immaterial, which created the universe out of nothing and brought it into being.
The implications of a finite universe, coupled with other discoveries of modern cosmology, have led many scientists to unmistakably theological conclusions.
There is no ground for supposing that matter and energy existed before and were suddenly galvanized into action. It is simpler to postulate creation ex nihilo, divine will constituting nature from nothingness.
The chain of events leading to man commenced suddenly and sharply, at a definite moment in time, in a flash of energy and light.
We can't understand the universe in any clear way without the supernatural.
Supernatural creation of the universe in a flash of energy and light. You know, it sounds an awful lot like the first chapter of Genesis to me. Today, the vast majority of even the most skeptical astronomers and cosmologists believe that the universe had a beginning. This belief isn't based on some theological doctrine. It's based on scientific evidence. And I think if we follow the evidence wherever it points clearly and powerfully and persuasively in the direction of a creator.
You call it the Kalam cosmological argument, which basically says everything that begins to exist has a cause. We now know the universe began to exist, therefore the universe must have had a cause. And of course, what kind of a cause could bring a universe into existence? Must be immaterial, must be eternal, must be powerful, must be smart. I mean, and you begin to see the qualities that reflect what the Bible tells us about God.
Yes.
That has interestingly come under attack in recent years for the first premise, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. I think you probably thought the big challenge would be on the second premise, which is that the universe began to exist, but that's pretty firmly established. The issue of things coming into existence without a cause is now kind of the popular counter-argument, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a recourse of desperation, frankly, Lee. As you said, when I wrote the Kalam cosmological argument back in 1979, I thought that the first premise, that whatever begins to exist has a cause, was virtually indisputable. Yeah. Nobody believes, for example, that a horse might just pop into existence out of nothing here in the auditorium, or a gas station, or an Eskimo village. Things that come into being have causes that bring them into being. It seemed to me that the controversial premise was the second one, that the universe began to exist. And so I adduced 4 lines of evidence in favor of that second premise, 2 lines of philosophical argument, and then 2 lines of scientific evidence. And what's happened, as you say, is that as that second premise has come to be more and more generally accepted, atheists have been backed into the corner of having to deny the first premise and to say that the universe just popped into being uncaused out of nothing.
It sounds silly when you say it.
Well, it's worse than magic. Yeah. When you think about it. It really is. In magic, when the magician pulls a rabbit out of the hat, at least you've got the magician. Right? But on atheism, the universe just popped into being uncaused out of absolutely nothing. So if you do not believe in magic, you should resist any kind of attempt to deny the argument by rejecting the first premise, because then you're believing something worse than magic.
They teach the kids it all started with a big bang 20 billion years ago. A big bang. I like to ask them some simple questions. What exploded? And where did it come from? And where did the energy come from? Et cetera, et cetera. According to the Big Bang Theory, it all started with a little tiny dot and exploded and spread out over all the universe much faster than the speed of light. Well, the Big Bang Theory, as we'll see in a minute, is stupid. I don't know of a better way to say it. I'm trying to be nice to them, but it is just stupid. The Big Bang idea started with a Belgian astronomer named George something, can't pronounce his last name. George said that this original matter was no more than a few light years in diameter. At the very least, that would be 2, or about 12 trillion miles. So they started off teaching a spot 12 trillion miles across was what exploded. Well, they revised that down. In 1965, they said, no, it was only 275 million miles across. Well, that's way down from 12 trillion. 1972, they said, no, it's only 71 million miles across. I don't know how they know this stuff, but this is what they taught, okay? 1974, they said it was only 54,000 miles across. 1983, they said it was the trillionth the diameter of a proton. Now they're saying it's nothing at all. Nothing exploded. And here we are. This is what the textbooks teach. 18 to 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated into one very dense, very hot region that may have been much smaller than a period on this page. That's stupid. This one says, all of the matter and energy someday will once again be packed into a small area, no bigger than the period at the end of this sentence. Then another big bang will occur. It happens every 80 to 100 billion years. So you can forget about global warming. We're going to get squished. Now, this textbook author was brilliant. I could not believe how smart this guy was. He said, boys and girls, nothing really means nothing. You have to be at least that smart to write a book. He said, not only matter and energy would disappear, but also space and time. However, physicists theorize that from this state of nothingness, the universe began in a gigantic explosion. What? Yes, boys and girls, you see, nothing exploded, and here we are. Now, who can argue with logic like that? Man, They even put this in major science journals like Scientific American. This fellow said, the observable universe, that would be us, could have evolved, there's that word again, you got to watch that one, okay, 6 meanings, from an infinitesimal region. In the Greek, that means a dot. It's then tempting to go one step further and speculate that the entire universe evolved from literally nothing. They call that science and put it in a science book. I would call that stupid and put it in the garbage. They're teaching this kind of stuff, folks. This one says, all the matter in the universe was drawn into this little tiny dot, and it spun faster and faster. This is what they teach the kids. Some kids doing this for homework tonight, right? It spun faster and faster. One day, it exploded. Big bang. I was talking to a professor from Berkeley one time. I was sitting on the airplane next to a professor from Berkeley University. We got talking about the Big Bang, and he said he believed in the Big Bang theory. I said, yes, sir, I figured that. You have to teach it in Berkeley. I said, tell me, sir, how did the universe get here? He said, well, 20 billion years ago, all the matter was squished in this little tiny dot, and it was spinning real fast, and it exploded. Big Bang. And pieces flew off and became the galaxies and the sun, the moon, the stars, and finally, you know, people. Here we are. So I asked this professor if I could ask him some questions about the Big Bang. He said, sure, what would you like to know? I said, well, sir, you told me 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was squished in this little tiny dot, and it was spinning faster and faster and exploded. I said, where did all this matter come from? He said, well, we don't know that for sure. I said, well, sir, would you please tell me where the laws came from? The universe is run by laws, gravity, centrifugal force, inertia. Who gave the laws? He said, we don't know that either. I said, sir, could you tell me where the energy came from? You know, it takes energy to make a big bang. Who bought the gas to run this machine anyway? He said, we don't know that either. I said, sir, could I ask you another question? He said, sure. What else would you like to know? What do you mean else? You haven't told me nothing yet. I said, does Berkeley have a merry-go-round? How many of you know what a merry-go-round is? You go round and round and round till you puke, okay? He said, no, we don't have a merry-go-round at Berkeley. I said, you ought to get one. You could learn some good science on a merry-go-round. If you put some 4th graders on a merry-go-round, are there any 4th graders in here tonight? Who's in 4th grade? All right, I like 4th graders. I spent the best 5 years of my life in the 4th grade. That's before they diagnosed ADD. Put some 4th graders on the merry-go-round. I like using 4th graders because they're tough and they're expendable. And we're going to get the high school football team out there to get that thing spinning clockwise as fast as it will possibly go. Now, if you have a digital watch, you may not know what clockwise means. I'll explain it later. We're going to spin the merry-go-round clockwise. The kids are going to go through 4 phases. They start off in phase 1. They're screaming at the football players. Come on, let's go. Faster, faster. Can't you go any faster? You get up around 30 miles an hour. The kids enter phase 2, where they stop screaming. They just quietly concentrate on trying to hang on for dear life. You get up around 60 miles an hour. The kids enter phase 3, where they start screaming again. But now they're screaming, stop, stop, please, slow down. Don't stop, though. Keep going faster and faster. When you get to about 100 miles an hour, you should enter phase 4. That's where the kids begin to fly off the merry-go-round. Now, when this happens, you will notice a very interesting phenomena of physics. If the merry-go-round is going clockwise, when the kid flies off, the kid will be spinning clockwise until he encounters resistance, like a tree or telephone pole. That's because of a law in physics known as the conservation of angular momentum. You see, if a spinning object breaks apart in a frictionless environment, the fragments will all spin the same direction. It's very simple. It's because the outside is moving faster than the inside. And so it keeps the same direction of spin. The professor said, yes, I understand about the conservation of angular momentum. I said, well, good. I'd like to ask you a question then, sir. If the whole universe began as a swirling dot, like you said, why do 2 planets spin backwards? He said, that's interesting. I said, no, that's more than interesting. It's kind of hard on your Big Bang theory. Not only that, 6 of the moons are spinning backwards. Why? He said, I don't know. Why do you think they're going backwards? I was hoping he was going to ask that. I said, well, sir, I believe it's very simple. You see, I believe in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and God did it that way on purpose, just to make the Big Bang theory look stupid. Stars blow up about every 25 to 30 years. If it's a little one, they call it a nova. If it's a big one, they call it a supernova, okay? But about every 25 or 30 years, a star explodes. Well, they search the heavens with the Hubble telescope, and they can not even find 300 supernova rings. Question, if the universe is billions of years old, why aren't there billions of supernova rings? Why less than 300? Which would mean less than 10,000 years. Yeah. Some people say, well, new stars are forming in Crab Nebula. No, there is no evidence of new stars forming. There are some spots getting brighter, and you can interpret that as new stars forming if you'd like, but it's not proof a new star is forming. Could be the dust is clearing and there's a star behind it. Any freshman law student could tear your argument apart in a court of law. Textbook says it takes billions of years for red stars to turn to white stars. That's what the books teach. That is simply not correct. We have overwhelming evidence that stars do change, that they fall apart, they burn out, they change from red stars to white stars. There seems to be pretty good evidence for that. But we also have evidence it does not take billions of years. All the ancient astronomers said Sirius was a red star. Everybody just 2,000 years ago was describing Sirius as redder than Mars, one of the red stars. Today, it's a white dwarf. We know what happens in less than 2,000 years. Don't tell me it takes millions of years. That's simply not correct. We have, see, one good experiment is worth a pound of theory any day. And we've got experimental evidence we can see and test and prove it doesn't happen that long. Some of the planets are still hot, but they're cooling off. They're radiating more heat than they gain from the sun. They can't be billions of years old. It's just not logical to say Jupiter, which is losing heat, is billions of years old. It just can't be. Jupiter has a little moon called Ganymede. Ganymede has a strong magnetic field. When it was discovered about this strong magnetic field, they said, wow, that's strange. That indicates a hot core, and yet Ganymede should have cooled off billions of years ago. I wonder why it still has such a strong magnetic field. Well, I can tell them why. You see, about 6,000 years ago, God created everything. Ganymede's not even 6,000 years old yet. Well, a few days older than that. It's real simple. Saturn has rings around it, but the rings are unstable and they're moving away from the planet. There are all kinds of factors that are affecting the rings of Saturn. Gravitational pulls and things like that. There's a good article about it in the book by Walt Brown, In the Beginning. Saturn's rings cannot be billions of years old. That fits the biblical theory that everything was created about 6,000 years ago. Okay, the moon is going around the Earth. How many knew that already? The moon goes around the Earth. Okay? Did you know as the moon goes around, it's gradually getting farther away? We're slowly losing the moon. It's only a couple inches a year, about 3 inches a year, so it's no big deal, nothing to worry about. Plus, there's nothing you could do about it anyway, okay? But the moon is getting farther from the Earth every year. Now, kids, this is going to be complicated, so listen carefully. The moon is getting farther from the Earth every year. So that means that it used to be closer. How many can figure this out? Now, stay with me, okay? All right. Well, if you bring the moon in closer, you start to create a problem because the moon causes the tides. Now, you folks in Jacksonville probably have to worry about the tides, don't you? If a hurricane hits during high tide, you got a serious problem on your hand. Well, if you brought the moon in closer, the tides would be higher because of a law known as the inverse square law. If you brought the moon into 1/3 the distance, you take the 1/3, inverse it, and square it. It's 9 times the gravitational pull. And if you run all the math on this, you'll find out about 1.2 billion years ago, the moon was whizzing around just above the surface of the Earth. Now, way before that, you're going to have a serious tide problem. So that explains what happened to the tall dinosaurs. They got mooned. Comets are flying around through space, but comets are constantly losing material. That's what the tail is blowing off of a comet. It's losing part of itself, okay? You can't just keep losing and losing. Pretty soon, it's gone. You know, it's kind of like your checkbook. See, if your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall every single time. Well, these comets are losing material, and it's been estimated they can't last more than about 10,000 years. Okay, well then I have a question. If the Earth is billions of years old, and if the universe is billions of years old, why do we still have comets? I mentioned this in a seminar one time, that this is an evidence that the universe is not billions of years old. Just the very existence of comets, like Halley's Comet, it proves it's not billions of years old. And this one atheist went home and devoted an entire website against me. There are now over 1,000 anti-Hovind websites. Type in Kent Hovind on the search engine and watch your computer melt. They hate me out there. So we spent about 2 months here last year, and we developed a series called Dr. Hovind Answers His Critics. And we answer all the stuff that they say on the websites on a video. We can get on video or DVD or audio track if you'd like, or CD if you want to listen to it as you drive. I give an answer to some of the stuff they're criticizing on there. But one of these atheists on his website, or you can also listen into my radio program. Go to Dr. Dino, my website, and go to the Creation Science Hour. We do a daily radio broadcast for an hour. Anybody calls, anybody from all over the world can call, and we get them from all over. And they ask questions. We have atheists call in and get angry and stuff like that. So that's what it's for. I want to be accessible, to be able to answer questions, because I'm going to defend the Bible view against all comers. Anyway, the skeptic on his website said, Hovind, don't you know that a Dutch astronomer named Jan Oort proposed, that means he hoped, he wished, he prayed, that there was a shell of comets out there at the remote frontiers of the solar system. He said the reason we still have comets is because new ones keep coming in from the Oort cloud. That's his theory, okay? He said this Oort cloud is 50,000 astronomical units away. Well, for those who don't know what an astronomical unit is, that is the distance from the Earth to the Sun. That is 1 astronomical unit, 93 million miles. Did you know it's pretty hard to see Pluto without an excellent telescope? And Pluto's only 39 astronomical units away. You certainly could not see a comet 50,000 astronomical units away. You see, nobody has ever seen the Oort cloud. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. The whole thing's based on a mathematical mistake. There is no Oort cloud. We got even guys like Carl Sagan, who said, many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution, yet there's not a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. They know all about it, except they've never seen it and don't know anything about it. There is no Oort cloud. But this skeptic, Madsen, on his website said, fellas, if you want to use the comet argument, it's up to you to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the Oort cloud and other sources don't exist. He's saying, I got to prove the Oort cloud doesn't exist. Now, just hold on a minute, Dave. That's not the way science works. What he's trying to do here is called shifting the burden of proof. The liberals are really good at doing that, and we fall for it most of the time. I'll show you how easy it is to shift the burden of proof. Suppose I said, watermelons are blue on the inside until you cut the skin. Prove I'm wrong. That'd be tough to do, wouldn't it? See, if all I have to do is make up a story and you got to prove it's wrong, I can keep you busy the rest of your life. And he's trying to make up a story that there's an Oort cloud and saying, I have to prove it doesn't exist. How on earth would you prove the non-existence of anything? Wouldn't you have to be all places at all times to prove anything doesn't exist? They can't find Osama bin Laden. Does that prove he doesn't exist? Did you know the galaxies up in the sky are spinning, but they're going different speeds? The stars in the galaxy are going different speeds. If the stars in the middle are going faster than the stars at the outside. If the galaxies were billions of years old, they would no longer have these spiral arms. The spiral arm galaxies are proof they are not billions of years old. So if somebody wants to believe they are, okay, you believe whatever you want, but it goes against the clear scientific evidence from the galaxies. They cannot be billions of years old.
The Earth is losing its gravitational field. The Earth's gravitational field is getting weaker. It's consistently getting weaker, like magnets. When you put them on the fridge, when they're new, they're good. After a few years, they lose their magnetism. Earth is losing its magnetism. At the current rate, it's declined 7% since 1829. That was in their last study. It's declined by 14% now in 2014 from 1879. You trace this back, the Earth cannot be more than 6,000 years old. You end up with some serious problems.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life-prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence suggests that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way.
I would like to come back to an earlier point, if I may, too, and that is the notion that atheists are somehow the intelligentsia among us and so forth. I think this is just completely false. The spate of new books published by the new atheists like Harris and Hitchens and Dawkins and so forth are not sophisticated books intellectually. These are, for the most part, angry, bitter diatribes against religion. And while someone like Dawkins may be a good scientist in his field, when he begins to talk about philosophy and theology, he is merely a layman. And The God Delusion is a very unsophisticated book intellectually. As a philosopher, I was just appalled at the arguments he gives in that book. It is an embarrassment, really, I think. There has also been, especially over the last 50 years, since the late 1960s, a literal revolution in my discipline, philosophy, in the Anglo-American world, which has brought about a renaissance of Christian philosophy, such that some of our finest philosophers at our most prestigious universities are now outspoken Bible-believing Christians. Let's name names, people like Richard Swinburne at Oxford University, Robert and Marilyn Adams at Oxford, Brian Leftow at Oxford, people like Alvin Planning at University of Notre Dame, Peter Van Inwagen, Dallas Willard, Eleanor Stump. I mean, I could go on and on naming names at top universities in America and England who are outspoken Christians, such that the face of my discipline, compared to the 1930s and 40s, when Russell and Eyre were dominant, has been utterly transformed.
All major fields of science were started by creationists. Bacon, Galileo, Kepler, Pascal, Boyle, Newton, all these guys, even if you go back further, Herschel and Faraday and all these, founded by creationists. Don't tell me you can't believe in creation and do science. Every branch of science was founded by creationists. So what has evolution done for science? Ian Taylor put it best. He said, well, it's given us thousands of scientists who make their living writing about evolution and teaching it. Yes, it has created quite an industry for itself, but it has advanced science not 1 inch. Matter of fact, it's hindered science because they keep trying to prove this theory that's been disproven over and over and over, and it's hindering where science can go. It's not helping the situation at all. Understand that in the mind of the skeptic, evidence isn't the issue. They're like the thief. They're not looking for the cop. They don't want to see God. They're walking after their own lusts. The reason they reject God is not because of science, it's because of, come on, we talked about this. The reason people reject God is not because of science, it's because of every single time, it's because of sin. Now, if you're a skeptic out there, would you be honest enough to say, if you accepted this as true, you would have to change your life. Your life would have to be different based on what God's word says. Would this affect your morality? Absolutely, it would affect.
Throughout the second half of the 20th century, spectacular technologies revolutionized scientific understanding of the cell, the basic unit of life. During an interview with biochemist Michael Behe, Strobel learned how this new knowledge has shaken the foundations of Darwin's theory.
In the 19th century, when Darwin was alive, scientists thought that the basis of life, the cell, was some simple glob of protoplasm, like a little piece of jello or something that was not hard to explain at all. But with the hard work of science in the 20th century, we've seen that the cell is far from simple. It's got very complicated molecular machines and things that are very resistant to Darwinian explanation.
Michael Behe has devoted his career to the study of the design and operation of the cell. He has also written extensively on the biochemical challenge to evolution.
Most people have no idea of how small and complex cells are. A typical cell from you or me, called a eukaryotic cell, is probably 1/10 of the size of the head of a pin. And yet, in that single cell, there are about 3 billion units of DNA, making out the chromosomes. And those 3 billion units make the molecular machines of the cell, literally machines that make the cell work.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell. Here, the staggering complexity of its molecular machinery is clearly seen.
It's like going into an automobile factory. The factory has a large number of machines. The parts have to fit together in very specific ways to do their jobs, and if things go wrong, the cell is in big trouble. And just one cell is enormously complex, but humans, you and I, are made from trillions of cells, and those trillions of cells have to fit together in the right way and do their own job. Darwinism was a lot more plausible when we were thinking about globs of protoplasm than it is when we're thinking about molecular machines.
Each of these biochemical machines is a masterpiece of engineering and nanotechnology. They are essential to functions as vital and diverse as vision, photosynthesis, and the production of energy in the cell. Michael Behe has studied several of these machines, including the flagellum, a remarkable rotary motor.
I remember the first time I looked in a biochemistry textbook and I saw a drawing of something called a bacterial flagellum with all of its parts in all of its glory. It had a propeller and the hook region and the drive shaft and the motor. And I looked at that and I said, that's an outboard motor. That's designed, you know, that's no chance assemblage of parts.
Behe's reaction was not surprising, especially when the bacterial flagellar motor is animated and magnified more than 50,000 times to display the details of its construction and operation.
Howard Berg at Harvard has labeled it the most efficient machine in the universe. These machines, some of them are running at 100,000 RPMs and are hardwired into a signal transduction or sensory mechanism so that it's getting feedback from the environment.
It's got some tail proteins which act as the propeller. When the flagellum rotates, these push against the water and therefore push the bacterium forward. And the motor uses a flow of acid from outside of the cell to the inside of the cell to power the turning.
The bacterial flagellum has 2 gears, forward and reverse, water-cooled, proton motive force. It has a stator, it has a rotor, it has a U-joint, it has a drive shaft, it has a propeller. It's not convenient that we give them these names. That's truly their function.
In all, about 40 different protein parts are required to build a flagellar motor. Half of them are constructor proteins, specialized mechanisms that assemble the flagellum's individual components. Since its discovery, biologists have tried to understand how a machine of such superb design could have arisen gradually, without foresight or plan, through the biological pathway Darwin envisioned.
I think what Darwin was trying to show was that things that look designed aren't really designed, but that we can find naturalistic processes to account for the complexity of life. Darwin theorized that every part of every living organism evolved through natural selection, a blind process that acts upon random changes in the cell.
Darwin believed that, given enough time, these random variations would transform the simplest cells into the great diversity of life that inhabits our planet. In his study of evolution and molecular machines, Michael Behe has raised a significant challenge to the creative power of Darwin's mechanism of natural selection. It is called irreducible complexity.
Irreducible complexity was coined by Mike Behe in describing these molecular machines. Basically what it says is that you have multi-component parts to any given organelle or system in a cell, all of which are necessary for function. That is, if you remove one part, you lose function of that system.
Irreducible complexity can be illustrated by a familiar, non-biological machine, a mousetrap. The trap is composed of 5 basic pieces: a catch to hold the bait, a strong spring, a thin bent rod called the hammer, a holding bar to secure the hammer in place, and a platform upon which the entire system is mounted. If any one of these parts is missing or defective, the mechanism will not work. All components of this irreducibly complex system must be present simultaneously for the machine to perform its function. Catching mice. The concept of irreducible complexity also applies to biological machines, including the bacterial flagellum.
All told, there are about 40 different protein parts which are necessary for this machine to work. And if any of those parts are missing, then either you get a flagellum that doesn't work because it's missing the hook or it's missing the drive shaft or whatever, or it doesn't even get built within the cell. You can't put something like that together gradually because they need a large number of parts interacting with each other at the same time before they work at all.
Without the tools to observe the machinery of the cell, and long before the idea of irreducible complexity, Charles Darwin offered a way to test his own theory. In Origin of Species, he wrote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down."
Darwin acknowledged that if someone identified a biological system that could not have been constructed in incremental steps over long periods of time, then his theory would be invalid. And what Michael Behe and others have discovered is the existence of biological machinery that cannot be explained away by Darwinian processes. Darwin's failed predictions have in fact falsified his own theory. The existence of complex biological machines raises an obvious question. If natural selection wasn't the agent of their construction, then what was? The centerpiece of my investigation was an interview with philosopher of science, Dr. Stephen Meyer. Meyer, who holds a PhD from Cambridge University, brought me face to face with the most efficient information processing system in the universe. The DNA molecule and its language of life.
The discovery of the information-bearing properties of DNA and RNA is a fundamental challenge to all materialistic theories of the origin of life. Neo-Darwinism and its associated theories of chemical evolution and the like will not be able to survive the biology of the information age, the biology of the 21st century.
Meyer's conclusions are based upon his understanding of the DNA molecule and the genetic instructions that are locked within the nucleus of living cells.
In 1953, when Watson and Crick elucidated the structure of the DNA molecule, they discovered that DNA was a carrier of genetic information in the form of a 4-character digital code. That is to say that DNA functions like a software program, only more complex than anyone has ever created or devised. For a biological system to run and operate, it needs genetic information to build the proteins and protein machines that cause the cells to maintain their function.
This information is stored in a precise arrangement of 4 chemicals that scientists represent with the letters A, C, T, and G. Sequences of these chemicals provide the instructions necessary to assemble complex protein molecules that in turn help form structures as diverse as eyes, legs, wings, and hearts. This code has been called the language of life, and it is the most densely packed and elaborately detailed assembly of information in the known universe.
Geneticist Michael Denton has estimated that the amount of biological information necessary to build all of the proteins in all of the species of organisms that have ever existed on planet Earth could be held in a single teaspoon. And we'd still have room left over for all of the information contained in every book ever written. The more I learned about DNA, the more I understood the significance of what Stephen Meyer called the most fundamental question facing biology today. Where did the information in DNA come from? How did it arise in the first place?
Well, lots of people have wanted to explain the origin of information by reference to the laws of physics and chemistry or by reference to the chemical properties of the constituent parts of the DNA. But that would be like saying that you could explain the information in this morning's New York Times headline by reference to the physics and chemistry of ink bonding to paper. There is a chemical explanation as to why the ink sticks to the paper, but that does not explain the way the ink got arranged to convey a message that could be understood by speakers of the English language. Information requires a material medium, but it transcends the material medium.
An explanation for the origin of the genetic instructions needed to build the first life is the holy grail of 21st century biology. Theories proposing that this information arose through natural selection acting upon non-living molecules, or the self-organizing power of chemicals in a primordial soup, have repeatedly failed. Even time and blind chance, the oft-invoked saviors of implausible biological scenarios, have fallen far short as accounts for the source of the instructions in DNA. Mathematicians, for example, have calculated that a universe filled with monkeys, typing relentlessly throughout the oldest estimated age of the cosmos, would have no realistic chance of producing Shakespeare's play Hamlet, let alone a transcript of the genetic information required to build even the simplest living cell.
Based on our uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning about the past, there is only one known cause for the origin of information, and that cause is intelligence. Whether we're looking at a hieroglyphic inscription, a section of text in a book, or a computer software, if you have information and you trace it back to its source, invariably you come to an intelligence. Therefore, when you find information inscribed along the backbone of the DNA molecule in the cell, the most rational inference, based on our repeated experience, is that an intelligence of some kind played a role in the origin of that information.
The implications of the scientific evidence, coupled with Meyer's logic, are profound. If we are finding information inside every cell and every living creature, could that not be, in a sense, the signature of a creator? God himself is invisible. He is a spirit. And yet, one of the purposes he has for us is to find him so we can know him. And he's left behind a series of clues. And sometimes we just have to kind of take our blinders off and get beyond our presuppositions and say, wait a minute, I am going to pursue the evidence of science wherever it points. And if it takes me to a very uncomfortable conclusion that there is a creator, then if the evidence points in that direction, that's the way I'm going to go.
According to a lot of the mainstream media, the theory of intelligent design is a faith-based idea. And in saying that, they want to dismiss it as something that has no basis in science. But the media has confused a fundamental issue. They're confusing the evidence for the theory with the implications of the theory. The theory of intelligent design may well have implications that are supportive of theistic belief, but the theory is not based on theistic belief. It's based on the discovery of digital code in cells, miniature machines in cells, the fine-tuning of the laws of physics and chemistry, and standard ways of scientific reasoning about the remote past in the history of life.
One of the most interesting things I've learned as I've gone on this journey of scientific discovery has been that you don't have to commit intellectual suicide to come to the conclusion that there is an intelligent designer. Because today, science is pointing more directly and more powerfully toward a creator than any other time in the history of the world. I was trained in journalism and law to respond to truth. I had to take a step of faith in the same direction that evidence is flowing, which is logical and rational. We do that every day of our life. We make steps of faith based on the evidence that we perceive. And so it was the most logical and rational step I've ever taken to put my faith in the creator that science tells me exists.